one of the darkest, richest Scotch whiskeys I've ever had. And in this video, I'm going to tell you all about it. Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies. And in this video, I'm going to do a review of the Glen Moray Peated PX Finish Speyside Single Malt Scotch Whisky. This is 2010. This is a special edition from the distillery. But before I get into this, here are my notes. The 2010 Glen Moray Peated PX Finish Whiskey is aged in ex-bourbon cask and then finished in Pedro Jimenez. It is a vintage of 2010, bottled in 2018. It is a distillery-only edition. It is unfiltered, has natural color. It's bottled at 55.8% alcohol by volume. And when I bought this at the distillery, it sold for about 60 pounds, which is around $76 at the time. And today, you can still find it online for about 120 euro. So I'm planning on doing an entire series on sherry and sherry aged whiskeys. So I'll go more into Pedro Jimenez in those videos. But for this video, we'll talk a little bit about it. Pedro Jimenez is a very unique sherry, only about 2% or less actually is Pedro Jimenez. Oloroso, Amontillado, Pelican Toro are all made from the Palomino grape. They're just aged differently. And Pedro Jimenez is a grape in and of itself. So Pedro Jimenez is made from Pedro Jimenez, whereas the others are made from Palomino. Less than 2% of sherry is actually Pedro Jimenez. And Pedro Jimenez, even of that, doesn't necessarily make its way into a bottle on its own. A lot of it is used for adding just a little bit of sweetness to other sherry. So you could buy an Oloroso that might have just a touch of Pedro Jimenez in it, even though it's not written that way on the bottle. So it's oftentimes just used as a flavoring wine rather than as something you can singly bottle. But you can find bottles of Pedro Jimenez. But I'm going to show you one, and you're going to see why people just don't sit around drinking, or in generally, Pedro Jimenez. So this is a Gonzalez Bypass No Venom Optimum Rare Signum Pedro Jimenez. It's a 30-year-old, sells for about $50, and it is intensely dark, intensely rich. 50 bucks for a bottle, you know, this size, fairly small, but it is so rich and so sweet and so thick. You're not going to sit around and drink a normal, say like as you would with a table wine. Just take a look at that. And as I slowly move it around the glass, you might be able to see how it starts to turn the glass brown. The glass starts to turn like a tan color, and it is thicker than a maple syrup. It's almost like motor oil that you would put in your car. And as I continue to spin it around, you can see it just continues to coat and turn the glass dark. And it is absolutely pitch black. And it's super, super, super sweet. Basically, it is like drinking liquid raisins. So, I mean, how tempted are you to want to just sit around and drink a glass of maple syrup, right? That's essentially what it would be like just sitting around drinking a glass of Pedro Jimenez. It is so thick and so sweet and so concentrated, it's just not your average person's drinking sherry. Now, the effect that Pedro Jimenez has on a cask is it really seeps deep into a cask. So when you put a whiskey into it, particularly say a peated whiskey into it, you could have a whiskey that's, I don't know, it's just, say 55 ppm and put into a Pedro Jimenez cask, and it is so absorbent, it is so clinging onto the peat character of that spirit that after the aging, and you put it into a bottle, a lot of the peat can get left behind. So if you try, say, for example, Ardbegs and Oa, It seems like a lighter peated whiskey than a lot of other Ardbeg expressions, but it's not. It has the same ppm as a lot of the other Ardbeg expressions, such as the Ardbeg 10, but it's the Pedro Jimenez that is sort of clinging on to a lot of the peat character so that it doesn't get expressed as much on the palate. So, a Pedro Jimenez cask aged whiskey is going to be super, super, super intense, typically really dark, and sort of like some port cask finished whiskeys, you can kind of go a little bit too far with them and they can kind of sort of take over. Personally, I prefer Oloroso, or occasionally you can find some Amontillado cask whiskeys. Very rarely can you find a Palo Cortado, although I've had a couple of them that were absolutely superb. So this is why Oloroso tends to be the preferred sherry cask rather than, say, Pedro Jimenez. Now, let's get into this whiskey. First of all, on-show filtered natural color. Let's look at the color on this one. That is dark. It's like the color of a dark root beer color. Yet there's also a slight, I don't know if you're picking up on the camera or not, slight red tinge. It's very shiny. So it's almost like a reddish root beer color on the nose. Really super dark, really super concentrated. Dark chocolate. Prunes, chocolate covered prunes, slight nuttiness. The smoke there is like almost like a charcoal briquette. A little bit of salty sea breeze. Almost like a black licorice. Almost imagine if you had like a non-sweetened black licorice, something like that. All right, on the palate. Wow. Super rich. Imagine like a dark chocolate cheesecake. It's got dried prunes, raisins, dark caramels. There is some vanilla. There's a little bit of spice. There's a little bit of like an unsweetened dark black licorice. It is super rich. Just a little bit on the palate goes a real long way. I'm still tasting now a real long finish. It doesn't necessarily have a huge development from the front end, the middle, into the finish, although it does dry out just a little bit. You start off sweet, it does become a little bit more dry on the back end. This is a whiskey that definitely needs some water. I find about 2 teaspoons does it just about right. Prefer to wait 15 minutes. I had a glass of this sitting in front of the television. I tried it neat and then put 2 teaspoons in it, let it sit through about a half an hour television show, and it seemed just about right. Now I'm getting some more savory notes, a dark leather note, more earthy components. The licorice note comes out a little bit more. A charred wood character. Everything is just super dark, super dense, and super concentrated. This is a whiskey that looks at Octomar and says, "What do you got? What do you got?" That's how intense this whiskey is. Wow. That just that little bit of water takes out sort of the overwhelming attack. Now it's got sweet and savory notes going on. It is still super dark chocolate, black licorice, dark caramels, some vanilla, but you get a little more of the nuttiness on the back end. It dries a little bit more on the back end. It becomes savory about 3/4 of the way through. Get a little bit more of a sort of a brown sugar and kosher salt and a savory rub that you would put on your barbecued meat. But it's still unbelievably rich. You'll still get a little bit of that dried prune, dried black plums there. The smoke in the peat is really well interwoven. So it's not a smack of peat upside the head. It is very tightly knit and clinging to those Pedro Jimenez notes. If you've never had Pedro Jimenez is essentially liquid raisins. That is what it tastes like, and you can tell in this glass that Pedro Jimenez and the peat are really bound together. So you're getting the peat smoke and the char and that intensely dark richness from the Pedro Jimenez are just intertwined with each other and really sort of at the core of this whiskey. Now, this is the darkest, richest single malt Scotch I think I've ever had. It is amazing. I think it's also a whiskey which, this is enough for the evening. If you're gonna have some other whiskeys, if you want to do a lineup, this is the last one you want to have, because after this pretty much takes over. This is gonna dominate over any other whiskeys you're gonna have. A little bit goes an extremely long way. You don't need a lot. Which is, if you think about having cheesecake, do you have like a large piece of cheesecake? Cheesecake is so rich, or fudge, or any super rich dessert. That is where this is at. It's just a super intense and rich whiskey. Now, what would I give it in terms of a score? It's kind of unique. I don't know anything out there that's quite like this. I like it, but I'm definitely gonna have to be in the mood for it. I'm definitely, I might have, a German chocolate cake or some chocolate cheesecake, something rich to go along with it that can compete with it. That might be the occasion for it. So this is a special occasion whiskey you're gonna have when it calls for something this dark and rich. Score-wise, I'm gonna kind of go an even 90 points. An even 90 points. This is not a beginner's whiskey, and it's also not your everyday dram. It's a special occasion whiskey. That's something in which calls for some this dark and rich. Really like it. If you can get a bottle of it, and you want to get to know what Pedro Jimenez is like, I highly recommend it. I think it's a fantastic whiskey. It'll give you something different in your collection in terms of a different profile. By the way, if you're not familiar with Glen Moray Distillery, they put out a lot of very affordable, I would say high quality whiskeys. A lot of them are wine cask finished whiskeys that here in the United States are $25 to $30. They're still they're going to be 40, 43 ABV. They're not going to, get much above that. But I still think they're really good wine-forward finished whiskeys that aren't going to break the bank. So if you've never had a Glen Moray, I would highly recommend checking them out. Alrighty, that's it for this review. If you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you haven't yet subscribed, but you like watching my videos, I would greatly appreciate if you would subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when I go live. And if you're one of my Patreon supporters, I want to thank you very much. Alright, until next time, cheers.